Welcome, guys. This is episode 25 of the Football Truth podcast. I'm honored and privileged to be welcomed by a special guest, Neil Armour, the director, or the director of West Coast Soccer in California. He was a coach of mine growing up for many years. While he was coaching me, was not my favorite coach, but afterwards I realized he was the best coach I ever had, and was really um, impactful on my development as a player and as a human being. So thank you, Coach Neil, for coming on.
No problem. No problem. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just get started? Why don't we just introduce your background in football and how you fell in love with the game as a kid growing up, and how you got into this world.
Yeah, so my first memories of playing soccer, was basically, I grew up in Scotland in a
Mhm.
place called Kilmarnock. For people not familiar where Kilmarnock is, it's the hometown of where Johnny Walker whiskey was made. So I actually worked in the factory there growing up when I was in my early 20s. A lot of people from the local town there grew up. They have a Premier League club called Kilmarnock FC right now. I grew up a Glasgow Rangers fan, so followed Glasgow Rangers from as long as I could ever remember. But grew up just like most kids in Scotland did. We had the old leather soccer ball, football that you laced up the front, and you had to cover it in something called dubbing so that the water wouldn't seep all the way into it and it wouldn't weigh like 20 pounds when you kicked it. But grew up like most people, just playing soccer in the street. You know, Sometimes my dad would come out and play with us and just running around with your buddies on the street and kicking the ball around. And Scotland, the weather's not great, so it's rains a lot. So there's the driest place is usually on the middle of the street dodging the cars. So we would that's kind of how I really grew up playing. When from from the very early stage, I used to live in a house where across the street was an old farm, and I mean it wasn't flat, but it was grass, and we used to just go in there and play soccer, avoiding the cow paddies as we were trying to kick the ball around. But many nights I would come back home, my mum would be mad because of all the cow dung that was attached to my shoes or my clothes or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how we grew up. We would just grab. There was no social media back then. You would just grab guys in the street, guys from other neighbourhoods, guys you would meet on other streets, and you would just organise get together at a certain place, at a certain time, and play a game.
Mhm. Do you notice that some of the younger generation that you're coaching at West Coast not have the same story of falling in love with playing on the street, maybe even like playing barefoot on the concrete, and it's more transformed into that like cone drill, summer camp, Western like factory style development.
I think in Southern California it's hard to play soccer on the freeways. The 405 and the 5 are pretty busy. But
It is pretty busy.
but yeah, I mean here the streets. Um, Yeah, you never see people playing in the streets over here. I think it's kind of a dying art a little bit. I'm not
Mhm.
too sure if I went back to Scotland if you would see people playing in the streets over there now as well. I mean, I see a lot of people, and I'm not for or against private lessons. I think there's a time and a place for privates and things like that. For honing your technique and things like that. But I mean, I think at the early ages you need you know um, continually practicing something. Repetition is very big. I
Mhm.
think over here people try to complicate it, and I think it's just the nature of the beast. I don't think it's necessarily just in the United States that
Mhm.
they're overcomplicating. I think actually all over the world right now they overcomplicate it. Like you said, they want to get cones down, they want to do drills, they want to do all that. I mean, we grew up playing a game called Wally, where you used to hit the ball off the wall,
Uh-huh.
right? And you'd have two or three guys just smashing the ball off the wall, and we would play that game for hours. And you would have, we would have different levels of it where you'd have one touch. You had to hit it above a chalk mark on the wall, or you had to keep it below that chalk mark on the wall,
Mm.
and it was a lot more difficult than you think. And I've told quite a few people over here is like, you know, rather than go and spend $50, $100, $150 every night on private lessons, go and get a soccer ball, find an old handball court, some of the local elementary schools here, and just go there for an hour, repetition, touches on the ball. I know
Mm.
my grandson Kellen is about to have his first soccer game. I think May 31st this week. Um,
Amazing.
out and he's only 3, but he's out in Dallas. But when I get him out here now, this time he's kind of at the age where, hey, just get a ball and let him. He just wants to kick the ball. He doesn't really want to do anything else. He likes to pick up. He likes to have volley. He likes to kick it. But if you can find a wall for him just to hit it against, there's one thing about when you hit the soccer ball off the wall, it comes back to you every time.
Yeah, I think that's something that I realized in myself too late that I was growing up. I just did more of that as opposed to, oh, I'm gonna do go and see this trainer and do this fitness running.
Well,
That wasn't like enough. That wasn't specific enough to soccer.
yeah, when we, when I think back to when I grew up, we had, which will shock a lot of people in America, is that we had 3 TV channels in Scotland. We only had 3 TV channels growing up:
Wow.
BBC One, BBC Two, and STV. And on a Saturday night, we used to have something called Sports Scene or Football Focus that would come on the TV. And very rarely we got a live game on the TV. And we would we would watch the games. You would get on there to see the highlights of the games. And as soon as we saw a player, whether it be in the World Cup or the Euros or whatever, as soon as we saw a player, we would go immediately get the ball, go out on the street and try to replicate what we'd
Mhm.
seen that player do. And that's how we taught ourselves. I mean, it was, when I think back to when I lived in a place called Shortleys. I lived in Shortleys, which was not a very nice neighbourhood, but it was a fantastic place where I grew up. I loved the place. Still go back there. My dad lives there now. Not the
Mhm.
best neighbourhood that you would grow up in, but fantastic people. And I lived on a place called Common Head Road, and Common Head Road was actually on a hill, but we still played soccer across the street, and the ball would always roll down the hill, and you would just get it, come back up, and we played. My dad's driveway was down onto the end of the street, and there was a guy across the street called Old Geordie Cook. His name was. I'll never forget it. And
Mhm.
he had a fence, so we would mark his fence as the goals for the other side, and we would just go. I mean, it was literally 20 yards wide, but Old Geordie Cook, every time the ball went in his garden, he kept it. So you had to try and get in quickly, get the ball and get out before Old Geordie Cook come out and took your
Yeah.
took your ball inside. He probably had about 10 of mine because my shooting wasn't very good.
Speed and agility training over the fence and
Yeah,
back.
yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. But we all used to, or we would go down to the local school where I would go down to the local Shortleys primary school, and there used to be some areas around there that you would. I mean, everybody played in the street. No, there was no video games back then.
Mm.
I had the nickname of one of still my best friend today, Darren Henderson's older brother, Gary Henderson, nicknamed me Big Break the Windy. Break the Windy means like break the window. That was my nickname. Um, because there was at the elementary school we would play against one of the big walls, but if you missed the wall, the window was right above it, and I must have broke the window about 10 times. Sometimes this would be in the off time. The school would be closed, and sometimes the ball would go in the window, and we'd lift each other up and climb in the school, get the ball back out, come back out, and play. Obviously, I don't recommend that to any of your
Yeah.
listeners, but that was just the way we grew up.
Well, it's funny. Even something as simple as what you're explaining, hopping up the wall, getting over, getting into the window, is like very basic locomotion practice to use their body in a more
Yeah,
athletic manner. But then kids these days, it's like they go from camps to the couch, to back to camps and the couch, and you know what I mean.
yeah,
What do you?
yeah. I think there's a time and a place for a lot of different things, but yeah,
Mm,
but when we think about, when you're talking about speed and agility, we used to. I think a lot of that came because we were outside all the time.
yeah, exactly.
We were running around all the time. I was very skinny when I grew up, very thin. I had no. I wish I could go back to those days now, but you were always. I don't remember a time where, and it didn't matter, hail, rain, or snow in Scotland. Like here in Orange County, if it rains, the fields are closed. Everybody goes indoors, right? In Scotland, if we had to call off things every time it rained, um, we would never leave the house ever.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
we we literally played outside all the time, dark, light. Didn't matter, because in Scotland in the winter time it's dark by 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
yeah.
So it's a whole. But in the summertime it's light till 11 p.m. at night. So it's you know if you didn't play in the wet and the wind and the rain and the snow, you would never get outside. We really didn't care.
Yeah, I think that's a big shift I've noticed in the younger players below my age, where they just don't really want to go outside as much. They want to have their uh, specialized training, and then
Yeah,
come inside and want
and
their comfort zone. No?
I think the specialised training is good. I got a couple of friends that do it,
Hmm.
and they do a very very good job. Um, you, I think again, right, when you're with one person for an hour, that specialised trainer is usually working on your technique, right? But for you to hone that technique and perfect that technique, it takes a lot of repetition.
Mm.
So if you're just going to the specialised trainer and getting advice from him, hey, you should strike the ball like this. This is the technique you should be using. This is the run you should be making. Unless you're going to perfect it, then it really is pointless, right? It really is pointless because I think I forget there's some book or something like that. It takes 600 or 1,000 repetition to perfect a certain technique, right?
Mm.
Which is probably not even, it might not even be that accurate, but you're not getting that in a 1 hour training session, a one-on-one training session. So I feel like when you're doing these personal training sessions, I think unless you're going to go out there, like I said, right, my personal trainer was the TV, right?
Mm.
Right. I
That's
saw
right. Yeah.
I saw Jim Baxter or John Gregg or one of my favorite players, like him, go for a sliding tackle because I was a centre back, right? Or go up and head the ball and or do a little flick or a little turn or a Cruyff turn. I never learned the Cruyff turn from a personal trainer. I saw it on the TV. You
Hmm.
immediately got your ball, went outside, and you 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 tried it and tried it and tried it and tried it. So if you think back to even those days, you would see, and we couldn't stop the TV and do slow motion and things like that. We had none of that stuff back in the day. It's there was lots of people who didn't even have TVs, but again, yeah, I think it's it's what you do with the information you're given that helps you perfect it, you know?
Yeah, one of the things I talk about is the emotional intensity of the practice itself, and how like you can do it like 1,000 hours of certain drills, but if you aren't actually like making progress or pushing the limit of that skill, then like you're saying, it could become pointless.
I think as well, in a practice, everybody tries to make it game related, right?
Hmm.
And keep that intensity, which it's hard to introduce that
Of
emotion
course.
and all that, and like people go out and they practice penalty kicks and all that, right? But
Yeah, of course.
but but when you go to a penalty shootout in front of 100,000, the World Cup final, there's no way to replicate the stress, the pressure, your emotion and all that you feel when you're going to go and hit that ball. So what have all these players done? They've learned to train themselves to be, psychologically strong, right?
Hmm.
Right? Mentally strong, right? They can't take away the feelings and all that, but they try to, shut it all out, and they've done it a thousand times, and I'm literally maybe 10,000 times, and they've hit it. They've hit the PK, or they've hit it in the exact same spot a thousand times, and it's it's just constantly just trying to just focus and shut everything out. I remember one of my good friends, Franz Hope, told me, I don't know if you know who Franz is, but Franz is a very, very good friend of mine. Franz been at a lot of clubs: Barcelona, Man United, Bayern Munich, Dutch national team. Fantastic guy. Um, he when we had he came out here, and I was and he did a course for West Coast one time, and it was and he was, I think he was at Man United. He was at Man United at the time, and he told me, which was something I didn't realise at that time, at the next level now in this day and age in the Premier League, nothing happens by chance on the soccer field during a game. Anything that happens, most of the goals and all that come through things they've done in practice. And I remember Man United had played Arsenal a couple of weeks before it, and I think they scored 2 or 3 goals. I can't remember. They won 2-1 or 3-1 or something like that. And he showed us the training drills for that week, and the 3 goals were scored from training drills.
Hmm.
And he said there's and it was something that when you think about it, it's you know again, repetition, right? These
Hmm.
guys, these guys. I just heard somebody saying that during the week there. I can't remember, a Man City player. He came in late on in the season, or he came in, or he had an injury early on in the season when they just signed him. They paid a lot of money for him, and they said that he couldn't get up to speed with the drills and the movement and the pattern play that they do, because these guys are just constantly doing. It's all repetition. Everything's
Hmm.
repetition now.
Yeah, they're tuned up to a higher level that it takes a lot of reps to get there.
Yeah, 100%. But it's not even just that though. It's like the education level of a soccer player. Your IQ has to be extremely high
Hmm.
to remember. It's not like American football where the quarterback's got all the plays written in his hand, right? Right.
Yeah, that's
All
right.
the all the plays have to be carried in here. You have a hundredth of a second, a hundredth of a fraction of a second to make a decision and execute it with perfection in
Hmm.
this, in front of 60,000 people. And the players that can do that more consistently are the guys that are playing at the very top of the game. Every player can do it when they're not under any pressure, right? And not
Right.
at the speed, but to go and do it at the next levels is just, it takes a you know a different level of focus, concentration, mentality. You know, I think
Hmm.
these are all things in the game today. Because even in the the soccer community. I mean, everybody wants to be a professional soccer player. I signed my first professional contract when I was 19. Um, After quitting soccer 2 years before that,
Mm.
when I quit soccer when I was at 16, and I wasn't very good, you know.
Mm.
Um, I'd been told several times, hey, you're no good enough. But I played in a lot of the top teams in Scotland. My school team was Scottish champions.
Mm.
The boys' club team I played with Kilmarnock Boys Club and Scottish champions. And back then, you only had 13 players or 14 players in the squad because you could only allow two substitutions back then.
Mm.
So back when everybody in the field was numbered 1 through 11, right? So when to get to that level, you sign and everybody thinks you see your English Premier League players playing, getting 100,000 a week and all that. Well, I signed my first professional contract when I was 19, and I was so proud. My dad was so happy, and I signed for a club called Greenock Morton
Mm.
for £17 a week, which is about $25 a week.
Yeah.
Um, and it was 45 miles away, so they gave me expenses and that to
Mm.
go to Greenock. For them that don't know where Greenock is, I think it's dubbed the wettest place in the United Kingdom. So I think hitting Manchester tie for the wettest place, but there's no glamour at that level, right?
Mm.
There's again, how many of these players today, when they, if they don't go through one of these big academies and they grow up, you see a lot of these young players today the with a lot of entitlement,
Yeah.
and I think that's, we grew up. I grew up with a lot more of the hard knocks, and I actually, when I think back, I think you had a lot more drive and dedication than a lot of other kids when you played. I still remember. I tell the story to everybody. I still remember the very, very first night that I ever saw you play. Because I tell everybody the story. You just came out of AYSO, right? You were playing the AYSO down Laguna Beach, and
Mm.
your dad was like, my son scores 100 goals a game or a season or whatever, right? And uh, and I remember we had a team at West Coast, and I didn't want to take over the team.
Mm.
I didn't want to take over the team. It was a team that was kind of falling apart, need to be rebuilt. And they had a tryout at San Juan Hills High School. I don't know if
Yeah.
you remember that or
Yeah.
not, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
But and I was sitting on the bench with Mike Lane, and Oliver Mike Lane was the president of West Coast at that time, and I'm sitting there going like that. I don't want to take this team. I have no interest in taking this team.
Mm.
Don't want to take this team. And I see you running down the left, and you're big boy, a little bit heavier than you look in better shape now. But you were running down the left hand side, and I'm like, I'm not happy that I'm there, and I'm kind of arguing with Oliver and Mike on the bench. I mean, this team's garbage. It's going to take a lot of work, and you're running down the line, and a guy. I can't remember. It might have been Ricardo or somebody. You're running. They hit the ball in a half volley, and it hit you right in the face, right as you were running,
Uh-huh.
right. And I don't know if it was momentum or just stupidity, but you never even broke your stride, right. I mean, the ball hit you flush in the face, and the ball went forward, and you just kept chasing it. And I turned, and I said, no word of a lie. I turned around and said to Mike Lane and Oliver, I says, okay, that guy's going to be my first signing. You know, that guy is going to be my first thing, because now in today's day and age, the kid would have went down and rolled around the ground for 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
I would have had to sub him out. He would have immediately went in concussion protocol, which is obviously a very important part of the game today
Of course. Of
before
course.
we get slaughtered. But again, you were like, I'm like, oh my, I just said, okay, that guy, that's going to be my first signing, because we can call it stupidity. But I felt it was determination and mentality. That's how I looked at something like that, right?
Mm.
So it's you don't see a lot of that determination and mentality in the game today.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean that was a funny day because I
Yeah,
think the A team was like the best team in the country
yeah, yeah, yeah.
at the time, and then the B team was falling apart.
It, yeah, no, the A team had won the league and fell apart, and
Oh,
the
okay,
B team just got relegated.
gotcha. Yeah,
We just got relegated, and that was the team with Nico Diamato on the team.
yeah, that's
Remember
right.
Nico?
Yeah, of
And
course.
Oliver turned around and said to me, Nico and Neil, you need to get rid of that kid there. He's no good enough. You'll never win anything with that kid on your team. He's not good enough. And
Mm,
Nico went on to play 4 years at Cal State Fulham and captained the team for 3 out of 4 years as well, and
yeah.
won the All Academic College Athlete of the Year 2 years in a row, which might never be replicated. But again, you look for different things in soccer players, and it
Mm,
takes, I just had this conversation with my coaches. We have, I think, 17 or 18 coaches here at West Coast now, and it's like, sometimes the coach is always looking for the flash and the skill and the little flicks and the turns and things like that. But you need a lot of the labourers on the soccer field to win games.
mm.
You need those guys that are going to, you know, that are going to roll up their sleeves and help other guys keep going. No disrespect to yourself, I would have looked at yourself as one of those guys, right? Like, you know,
I
you get
know, I know.
you get 4 or 5 guys like that in your team. You don't lose a lot of games.
Yeah, of course.
No.
Yeah,
And then you get some more guys in your team that are a little bit more gifted, we might say. So it's like, again, it's just, it takes all kinds to build a successful team.
over the years, has your approach to scouting and signing players changed at all?
Um, the soccer landscape in Orange County in Southern California has completely changed from when I started 20 years ago. I mean, obviously, I'm the director now at the club, so I'm not building teams anymore. I'm not currently coaching a team. Well, I'm currently coaching one team that a coach left, but
Mhm.
I think there's so many teams in Orange County now. Everybody's just taking players from other clubs. But my philosophy of how you can go out and still find players, it's a lot harder to find those players because a lot of those players I used to go to Santa Ana on a Wednesday night and I could find 3 guys and bring them back on a Saturday and put them in the team and win
And
games
win.
with some pretty talented guys.
Yeah.
Now everybody's there scouting players. My mentality to scouting a player is a couple of different. You actually have scouting courses now and scouting licenses now and all this stuff. But
Mm.
I still think though, when you're scouting players, if you don't have the vision to see how that guy's going to fit into your setup or where he's going to play, and you don't know the level you're scouting for, I think is a big. I think when I used to go and scout players, I would be able to look at players like yourself and think, okay, you know, I think you were a forward at that time, and that turned you into a left back or a centre back, and I
Mhm.
don't think your dad was too happy that you weren't scoring goals. But again, I just, I would look at someone like yourself and think to myself, right, okay, at the next level, is he going to be a striker?
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
answer clearly to that is no. And we do it. So when I go out and I'm scouting and I'm looking at a guy, the guy could be a centre back, and I'm like that. Be a good six.
Mhm.
Discipline. Could just sit in there. Just link up the play. Or you look at a fullback, and you're like, oh, he could play as a in the right of a forward midfield, or he could play as a wing back, right, and in a three at the back, or his adaptability. You've got the guy that can play in 2 or 3 different positions. But when you go out, it's looking at the guy and trying to figure out. and a lot of times here you have to deal with the parent mentality, right?
Yeah, of course.
You know, if you've got a guy in who you think should play in a certain position, but then the parents don't want him to play that position, you got a problem over here, right? You know, I remember a kid. I remember a kid. Me and Oliver saying about a kid that I'm not going to mention his name, but the he was a striker, and me and Oliver like that is be a good right back. This boy, right? You know, he just wasn't a very good striker. And me and Oliver were like, hey, if we play him right back, he's going to leave the club, right?
Yeah.
Right, and it's like so. Eventually, we play him right back, and he leaves the club, and he
Mm.
went to one of the other local clubs called United FC. And where do you think the coach played him? Right back.
Right back.
Yeah. Uh, so it's like, you know, um, I think so. So when you're scouting players, it's having that vision to say to yourself, right, okay, how does he perform at the next level? How does he perform with better players around him?
Mm.
Um, is he got the mentality to roll up his sleeves and put in a shift? I think now in soccer, there's the I forget there's that program where you can just go on and you can see clips of every single player and all their stats
Yeah. Yeah.
all across the world now. But that I think a lot of people use that. Yeah, it probably works and it works really really well. It probably takes a lot of the heavy lifting out of scouting because I can tell you, I scouted players for years. It's the most time consuming part of soccer.
Mm.
You know, having to spend a couple of hours there watching a player who might be no good.
Mm.
Um, so again, it's it's a lot of time and energy. But I still think that that personal touch part of it has been taken away a lot of times
Mm.
in soccer because sometimes I follow Glasgow Rangers probably to my probably
Yeah.
why I've got all the white grey hair now. Is that it's
All the stress. Yeah.
all the stress, yeah, all the stress. But again, in Scotland, you grow up supporting a team. You don't just change here in America. You're changing football teams. They change cities. They change
Yeah.
this. It's like if you took Glasgow Rangers out of Glasgow, you'd have a million fans worldwide that would probably all fly back to Scotland and they would have a riot. So.
Hmm.
It's a different mentality in Europe, as you probably find out there in the Middle East now.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned about how modern, or let's say how stat driven scouting has become, are there any attributes that you would say are harder to quantify that you find really valuable in a player?
I think if you're going, I never thought soccer would go down the stat driven route.
Mm.
Years ago, I've always felt that was more of a baseball, basketball, football type thing. It was easy,
Yeah.
if you're a runner, your time is your stat, right? Nobody cares about your technique when you're running as long as you can get from A to B faster than the other guy. Um, but I think if you don't go and physically see that guy, I think stats can be a little bit misleading, right?
Mhm.
Um, do um, um, doing going doing your due diligence, seeing a little bit of what his background's like. When I was
Mhm.
going and see when maybe go and watch him play when his team's not doing so well. See what his
Yeah.
attitude is on the field. We always try to tell these guys. If young guys don't believe you, like, what is, go and watch him before the game, see how he warms up, see how he interacts with the rest of the teammates, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I remember when, when there was no stats and I was going to sign for Greenock Morton, and nobody in Scotland was ever very positive, right? It was always we kind of doer, as we say, and but it's like I mean, literally, you would go for a tryout in Scotland, and if you didn't do well, it didn't matter what your stats said. Coach that coach would have told you. I remember going for a tryout with St Mirren, and St Mirren were, I can't remember, they might have been Premier League at that time, going for it. And in the first half, I had an absolute nightmare of a game,
Mhm.
right? And I can't remember who the manager was. It might have been Tony Fitzpatrick or something like that at that time. I can't remember. I shouldn't be dropping names on here, but at half time, that guy, if there's a name, explicit name that you could have called anybody, and I'd only met him an hour before the game. I was the guest player. I was a
Yeah.
trialist. He called me every one of those names at halftime, right?
Yeah.
But then you're like, you're you talk to the coach and that about them. You get a little bit of a feel for them. You do a little bit more due diligence. People would have probably said, Neil's a hard worker. He's a little bit like, roll the sleeves up. A little bit thick skinned. And like I go back to Scotland, I remember, I could never figure it out. Now I know I'm a little bit wiser. I figured it out. I would come off the field at Morton, and I would have thought I played well that day, and maybe Jackie McNamara or George Anderson, who was my coaches at that time, would have slaughtered me and just said you weren't
Mm.
good enough. And I was like, wow. And I was always very self-critical of myself. So when people told me that, it just lit a fire in me, even to do even better, right? And it was, I'd be mad. I'd be like, right, okay, I need to do better. I need to do even better, right? And it's, a lot of psychological stuff in soccer. I think that's maybe not so much in the game now, right? You know,
Mhm.
I mean, I think sometimes everybody wants to have their wants a hug, and when things are not going their way, or it's pick me up and all that, and everything's going to be okay, son. Don't worry about it. I never got any of that growing up, as you probably know when you played for me, right?
Well,
I didn't have that much of that to give out.
well, that was one of the things that I always really valued about playing for you after the fact.
Yeah,
Is just like that voice in the back of my head, like always saying what I could have done better. And even when like there's certain passes or tackles or different plays where it worked, but it still wasn't really good enough, where other coaches wouldn't put their foot down, you know.
yeah,
But just from playing for you for enough years to actually like that voice has never left
yeah.
my mind when I play football.
I think for me, I don't think I ever asked players to do things that I didn't think they were capable of.
Of course.
And I think I used to, I'm a little bit more mellow now, but there's I used to think like it was never personal with me. I wasn't there to be your friend or anything like that. I was there to be your mentor, be your coach. I see a lot of
Mhm.
coaches out there, friends with everybody on the team and things like that. It's just not me. Um, it's again, it's you know, I remember George Coons saying to me one time, "You one of your old coaches at college. It's like if you got if you got a player from Neil's team, and they're hardworking, they're very disciplined, and they're a little bit thick skinned, right?
Mhm.
So meaning like, hey, if you had to get on that player a little bit and push that player a little bit harder, if they came from my team, then they were capable of doing that, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that could be good or bad, right? But I think you know it starts with the coach. It starts, I'm having this thing right now at West Coast about, hey, making your players show up in time,
Of
right?
course.
And you get coaches out there that are saying, hey, well, I can't make all the players showing up in time. The parents are bringing them. On my team, you showed up on time, right? I mean, if you
Yeah,
didn't show
that's
up on
right.
time, you chance you're not playing. Now I get it. Everybody can get a flat tire, but when you go back and you look at it, the guys that are habitually late all the time are the same guys that are usually probably no starting on your team. And if those guys are starting on your team and they think you can be late just for that matter of fact, then they're not a team player. And usually I would end up getting rid of those guys.
Hmm.
I think it's I think discipline and determination goes a long way in a soccer player. Skill only takes you so far, right? But
Hmm.
you have to have a work ethic to go to the next level.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed after I left West Coast and interacting with lots of different coaches and from academy to college
Yeah,
to I guess like semi-professional and then some like pro teams in Europe, is that you were able to get a group of guys and develop them into a team that those guys by themselves might not be the most talented players
yeah.
across like the whole region, but you would win. So how did you kind of think about and prepare a team?
I think it was funny because if you remember that year when we won the league that year, when we got relegated, and then there was 4 or 5 teams in the league were all probably there was 4 teams for sure that were maybe better than us, right?
Mhm.
And one of those teams was a club called, I think it was Cal Rush or something like that, or Rush or
Mhm.
something like that. They were out in Victorville. We had to beat them the last game of the season. Remember at the Oso Fields to win the league.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Um, um, and after that game, it was kind of strange because the guy that ran that club, and they were out in Victorville, which is about 2 hours from here. So he called me up. He called me up and asked me to go there and coach their team because they had. I don't know if you remember that team. They had big over Mexican players, Hispanic players that were very very talented, right? And we
Mhm.
beat them 3-1 that day. Um, and he says, I need you to come and coach my team. And he was offering me, I forget, it was like $200 a session. That's 20 years ago, dude. That was decent money back then, right? And
Sure.
included expenses to drive to Victorville. And he was like, just come once a week, Neil. And I'm like, and the reason he wanted me to come, he says, because he had the best team in the league, but I had the best team. You know what I'm saying? He had the most
Yeah, yeah.
talented team in the league, but I had the best team. Um, but when you look when you look at, I think it's molding young men into becoming, all you don't always have to be best friends, right? But when you cross that line, a lot of those guys, would have died for each other. And we had a good mix of hardworking guys. We had, at the back we had like Ricardo, and up top we had Arturo that toe poked 20 goals a season, right? And then
Yeah.
then we had the little Hispanic kid that played in the midfield, Adonis. Remember Adonis? So
Yeah,
he's
yeah, yeah.
probably the best player in the league, right?
Mm.
But we had a good blend of blue collar worker guys on the team that wanted to win and had a determination. And then I just with a lot of the stuff that we did in the preparation and all that, getting you guys together a lot. We did some off field events all the time, and you make it a little bit enjoyable for them to come there. But you know yourself, like as soon as I said work, then there was no clowning around really for me, right? It was you had to work, and I think I don't see the same thing, and even in the team I just took over a few months ago, I took a team over a few months ago, and I look at that team and I'm like, pretty talented, right? But I'm like that. If we get down 1-0, we're done.
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, I never felt that about your team. You know, it's or you know, I had a couple of good teams after that, 01s and 2000s. I never felt that about those teams. You know, I didn't feel under pressure if we went down 1-0. You know, even if the other team was good, I felt we could always drag ourselves back into the game. You know, teams. You know, I think when people, like I always say this, right? When I coached a team, 50% of the team hated me and 50% thought I was okay, right?
Yeah,
Right?
pretty much.
It's but everybody knew I had their back, right?
Mhm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it's like, you know, if kids, they respect you, right? You've got discipline. You treat every kid the same, right? Which I did, right? It's like it didn't matter if you were the best player in the team or the worst player in the team. You got the same reaction from me. If you never showed up to practice, you never played, right?
Mhm.
You know, you couldn't come late. These were all things that help. I think it helped mold you into to working hard for each other. And I think where a lot of people make a mistake today is see when every team has, and no disrespect to some of the guys out there or on teams that I've had, but you have 13, 14 guys that are your guys, right? You
Mhm.
carry 18-man squad. Then you have three or four guys that are show up to absolutely everything, never miss a training, right? Always first there, last to leave, but they're not quite as talented as the other guys, right? But but you also need those guys that are very important, integral part of the team. And the thing that I realised early on is like when you put in the rules of like, hey, you don't come to practice, you don't play, right? Or you don't start, right? And if you carry a 19 or a 20-man roster, you don't, even if your best player doesn't come, when you show the kids that you're willing to leave that kid out, even in an important game,
Mhm.
that gets like, and I'm not using you as an example, but I'm just saying like, hey, if you were number 14 or 15 on the roster, right, and the guy that starts in your position that week has missed a practice, you've went home to your parents and said, hey, Joey's missed practice this week, mum. I've got a chance of playing, and
Mhm.
you're on a high, right? Right? You're on a high. You're excited. I've got a chance of starting. At least you're going to start before him, or you've got a chance of playing before him.
Yeah,
So when it comes to the Saturday and you have a game and you don't play that kid and you play the guy that never showed up to training, at that point in time I lost you,
of course. Yeah.
right? But when I play you, right? When I play you, then I have you for life, right? Because when I'm telling you something, you can take it to the bank, right? When I tell you, hey, if the best player, we're in the cup final, and the best player never showed up, and I leave him out of the team, all of a sudden, everybody else believes in it. And then the three or four guys that maybe 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, they're really bought in now, right?
Mhm.
They've taken their game to a different level. And the one thing I always find is number 14, 15, 16, 17, when you put them in, they always surprise you, and they're always better than you actually give them credit for. And you got to as a coach learn to trust them a little bit more.
Mhm.
But I just think when you do things like that, everybody buys into it. I had a parent meeting recently with a team at West Coast, and the parents were, we should play the best team. We should play to win every week, right? And I'm in a meeting. I'm not coaching the team. The parents have issues. I'm talking to the parents. So
Mhm.
I turn around and say to the parents, I says, okay, you want to play the best team to win every week? Yeah, no matter what, whether he comes to practice or not. And this one parent's like, yeah. I said, okay, all you parents that are willing to, your son sit on the bench for his son to play because he missed practice twice that week, but he's the best player on the, let's say he's the best player on the team. All you parents that want your son not to play that week because he missed practice because you want to win the game, put your hands up. Do you know how many parents put their hand up?
How many?
None. None. right? Because at
Mm.
the end of the day, in their mind, they might not agree with how you're doing it, and that, oh, oh, he missed. I mean, I remember, I remember signing my contract for Morton, and it's you talk about being disciplined and things like that. And I'll never forget it. My dad's in the office, Alan McGraw's office, and Alan McGraw says to me as I'm walking out the door, I'm a 19-year-old kid, right? And he goes like that. he says, he says to me, you don't miss practice now, right? He says, don't call me up and tell me your mum's died and that you have to miss practice because you cannot miss practice for anything. So, and listen, that's taking it to a whole other extreme, right?
Mm.
Of course, they would give you time off if your mother died, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But he was basically telling me there's no other excuses for missing training. Basically none, right? I mean, basically that's what he's telling you. It's like, people go like that, oh, my grandma died, and I'm like, yeah, but everybody's got, in Southern California, all the players have 10 grandmas, Some of them have died more than once, you know?
I've seen that myself too.
You know,
Yeah,
some of them have died more than once, you know what I'm saying? It's, so it's, so it's like, hey, if people have emergencies, which they do, I tell them to take the time. But it doesn't matter what the emergency is. If we have 20 guys and everybody else shows up to training, I will
yeah.
back you and support you for the emergency. But the guys that have been at training that week will still play.
Hmm.
You
As
know,
they should. Yeah, as they should.
you'll just have to wait and get back in the team again. But family's very, very important. And if you have a family emergency, you should absolutely take care of your family emergency, and then just be a little bit patient. You'll get back in the team. But the reality is, right now, your spot's going to go to somebody else, and that's why we carry a squad, and that's why we do what we do. But I
Mm.
think that all ties into why when you become more cohesive as a team, you know you got to get a lot of guys with the same mentality on the same team, and even the guys that are more talented, you've got to kind of get them all on the same team, and try to avoid the big egos, which is hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, one of the things that was very distinct for me was with playing for you at West Coast is our team was really had a family culture to it,
Yeah,
and then other teams I played on, it was really the exact opposite. Players didn't care about the other guys, and even though they were very talented, it just didn't work out on the pitch.
yeah. I think some of it as well is like I'm always like, because obviously you pay to play over here, and some kids are a little bit better off than other kids. But I
Mhm.
also had the mentality on my team is, no kid would ever be left behind. Like when we go on trips and things like that, we took everybody. If we
Mhm.
couldn't take everybody, then we just didn't go, right?
Mhm.
Because I also felt like when you're building that camaraderie on your team, like travel's a big part of it, right? And it's I think travel's a big part of it, and you that's where a lot of the bonding and all that is done.
Yeah.
Um, and you deliberately, hey, maybe put Taylor in a room with a guy he doesn't like, or maybe you don't have the best relationship with, right? And
Mhm.
and then it's we used to do that, play a little bit of mind games, I'd make the list and parents would be saying, hey, my son wants to be in so and so's room. Nah, it's not happening. You know, he's going to go with this guy and this guy, and I think that like I said, a lot of guys don't necessarily need to hang out, but a lot of guys they're competitive, and you build a little bit more respect for the guys. I don't just want to say you got a great bond with everybody because that's never the case, right?
Mhm.
But you gain a little bit more respect for them.
So I want to talk about the changing landscape of U.S. soccer. What is going on?
It's yeah, I mean, it's just big business now, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's massive business now for these clubs. I mean, some of these clubs now have multi-million-dollar revenues now, you
Hmm.
know, and it is business. I mean, you know, the fact of it is, you know, when I go back to teams that I've had, and you know, Sharif, Celtic FC, Valley United Blast that we had when we played in the SoCal Premier League,
Hmm.
those teams would all kill any team on the planet today. You know, I just
Hmm.
think too many leagues. Um, you know, the the talent pool was very, very, very diluted. Whereas before in Southern California, you know, a lot of the teams were you were all the best players flowed up into the Premier clubs or the Premier teams, and every team was was very, very good. And I think, you know, there's so many teams now and so many different leagues. I
Hmm.
mean, now if some of these big clubs, if if you don't like things the way they're going on at your club, then you form another league, and
Yeah,
then you
exactly.
tell everybody it's the latest and the greatest. And I think, I think that's where some of the disconnect is. I think, like in other countries, it's hard to do that.
Hmm.
I think, but there's all these different governing bodies over here that USYS, you know, US soccer, US club soccer. Um, there's all these governing bodies over here that it's kind of free market, open market. You can basically do what you want, but I think before each club was only allowed to have three teams in any particular age group. I
Hmm.
think some clubs have 15, 20 teams in an age group now, and that's bigger than some clubs used to be. In some of the talent pool gets lost in the weeds, right?
Of course. Yeah.
I think it's just. I don't think it'll change. You've got MLS next. You've got ECNL. You've got ECNL. We're currently playing in the ECNL. Um, I like that league. I like the ECNL. I think it's good competition. Nothing's like what it was back in the day, though. You know, when you played. I mean,
Hmm.
but I mean, there's good competition. It's competitive. All the teams are pretty competitive. But you're competing with every single other league in the um, around the area, and then if you don't counteract what they're doing, if they decide to form a flight two or a flight three, and you don't do it, then you're losing players to that team, and it's basically it's kind of a crapshoot. I don't see it changing anytime soon. It just is the nature of the beast right now, so we
Hmm.
just have to live with it. But again, I think at the top level here, I think soccer's pretty healthy. Obviously, you've got the USL. We played in the USL Academy last year. We
Hmm.
came in first in our division out here in the southwest, which is a U20 league with 10 overage players. You can play 5 overage players over
Hmm.
the age of 20 in a game. That was very good for us.
Nice.
Um, so I think there's, USL's bringing in Division One. You've obviously got the MLS, which is obviously, a very well established league now. That's we're attracting players like Lionel Messi, not in their prime though, but we're attracting them
Yeah. Eventually.
eventually. Yeah, last big payday.
Yeah. I mean, like for myself, growing up playing for West Coast, I would like having the. I think it was called SoCal Premier, where
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was bronze, silver, silver lead, gold
yeah, yeah,
Premier.
yeah.
Like that was my like I thought that was brilliant. And then of course, things change very fast.
Yeah, well, at that time, the some of these clubs wanted to have more than three teams in
Yeah,
any
yeah,
particular age group. So, Gary Sparks wouldn't allow that, and because he didn't want these mega clubs coming in and
yeah.
taking over. So, which eventually happened anyway.
Yeah, happened anyways.
So, at that point in time, you forced all the best players to want to go and play in one league. and it was a very, very competitive league. I mean, like I said, some of the teams that I had, I had two players that played on the national team that back then on some of my
Mm.
teams. So again, it's very, very way more competitive. Just to put things into perspective, it's a small point, but when I had the team back in the day, it was a '92 team. It was a 91, 92 team. Um, Kiwi Canales, Jaime Gutierrez, people like that in the team. Those every single one of my players played varsity at high school as a freshman.
Mm.
That doesn't happen today. So,
Mm.
every single player that was on my team was on the varsity team and starting. That's how talented those teams were. And there was no DA or anything like that back in the day where they
Mm.
said you couldn't play high school,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, these high schools were full of unbelievable players. So that just kind of gives you every single player on that team played varsity as a freshman on my team,
Mm.
which today you'd be hard to find half four or five guys on one team that could go on the varsity team as a freshman because it's so
Wow.
diluted now.
So what do you think's changed specifically?
The leagues, more
Yeah.
leagues, more teams, more options. It's
Yeah.
like if little Joey's not happy here, then he can go to another club across the street, and play there
Mm.
and be told he's great, right? I mean, basically, it's I think there's too much, too many different leagues, and the quality's definitely dropped a lot.
Mm.
How we fix that, I don't know. I think it's way too late. I think it's more a case of how do we work within that kind of structure to
Mm.
to continue to develop players. I mean, you can't say the US is not developing players, because I mean we have more players than ever that are playing in Europe now, right?
Yeah.
You know, um, hence Jurgen Klinsmann probably lost his job because he kept saying everybody should go to Europe and play, right, which he
Mm.
was never a fan. People were not a fan of him because he's
Mm.
encouraging all the young guys to no stay here and play in the MLS and to leave and go to Europe, which then hurts the league here. But when you look at it now, you know, be hard for an MLS player to get in the US national team unless he's playing just because, as a token player, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because most of the top players are playing in Europe now, and we have some very, very good players that are playing in Europe, right?
Yeah, and I think there's more foreign-born players with American origin that are willing to come over and to play for the U.S. as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah. I don't even know if there's that many of them that are in the national team though, but I think it's more to do with you know we at Rangers had Malik Tillman playing at Rangers just not that long ago, and I mean nobody really knew who Malik Tillman was until he went to Rangers. He played at Bayern Munich and that,
Mm.
but again that's just a sign of he's an exact example of a kid that's went to Europe,
Mm.
developed in one of the top academies, right? And I think people look at it as, hey, you can always come back and play in the MLS later on in your career, right? But you got people like Pulisic, just at AC Milan and things like that. We got some talent all across the world right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think they might not necessarily be developing the academies here. I think a lot of those players are getting snapped up and persuaded to go to Europe when they're 18 now, or they
Yeah.
have dual citizenship. Um,
Mm.
I think you've always got to push yourself to play at the highest level. So these guys it's tough decisions for these guys, but
Mm.
I think a lot of these guys is going to definitely help the US national team come the 2026 World Cup.
Mm. Well, I think a really good point to finish on is what would you tell a young American player in California or Texas or anywhere in the country that wants to go play at the highest level in Europe? What should be their their pathway?
I mean, I think now it's if you have the means to try to go, you should always be pushing yourself outside what you think your own limitations are, right? Um, talent alone's not going to get you there. I mean, I think if you're looking to, unfortunately, here with the college system is a little bit broken. Some of my college coach friends are going to slaughter me right now, but I think like in my opinion, if you could, when you're done playing your club team, if you could go and try and play pro or train, I mean, the most important years are probably 14 to 18, right?
Hmm.
Unfortunately, in soccer, if you've really no made it in academy by 18, 19, they're usually letting you go, right?
Yeah.
So those years, I mean, if you have the means to train full time, I know San Diego soccer clubs used to putting a residential academy in and down in San
Hmm.
Diego. No San Diego soccer club, San Diego FC San Diego. They're putting
Hmm.
a residential academy in down there. That if that's the route I would go, if you can get in some kind of residential academy where you can eat, sleep, and breathe soccer and train every single day,
Hmm.
especially those important years 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Those are very important years. If you have any opportunities to go and, if anybody wants to play professional soccer, there's an opportunity out there for everybody. People forget there's all these different leagues. I played in Scotland, then I went and played in Hong Kong and China for 5 years.
Hmm.
Right, loved my time out there. I think if you're determined enough, there's a way for everybody. But any time you can get any full time training, I think when I first started playing soccer, I was part time, so I trained 2 or 3 days a week
Hmm.
when I first played professional, and then when I went to play in Hong Kong and China was actually the first time that I had trained full time and did it as a full time every day, twice a day, some
Wow.
days, right?
Yeah.
Or in China, 3 times a day sometimes. Um, the that enhanced my game. Again, it's repetition, right? When you're doing things, you're constantly doing it. You're
Hmm.
constantly improving. If you get an opportunity to get into these one of these full time academies. I know Galaxy and LAFC and all that out here. They have guys go up there. They train 4 nights a week. But I think when you have a residential academy and you have 100% control of those players and your your eat, sleep, and live in soccer is definitely an opportunity. And I think if a kid's got dual citizenship, I mean, I had 3 daughters, Chloe, Nikki, and Kyla, but I got them their British citizenship as soon as I could.
Yeah. Of course.
Right? These are very important things, right? If you have a chance of dual citizenship, then you should exploit that. I think like you said, like when you start traveling, because when I first came to America when I was 11 years old to play in a soccer tournament out in Michigan, there was probably 50% of the American population didn't even have passports, which is unheard
Yeah.
of in Europe, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I think when you start traveling for soccer and you go away, um, go and embrace it, go and see it. When you travel alone, even if you're 16, 17, you go to a club in Europe, you're staying away from your parents. Your
Hmm.
mum's not there to do your laundry, your cooking, your cleaning, and all that, and you have to fend for yourself. You kind of have to grow up pretty quickly, and I think if you've ever get any opportunity for any young player to go and experience as much as they can while they're young, and then make a decision. If this is what you want to do, it's definitely not for the weak-minded or the faint-hearted. That's for sure.
Yeah. Coach Neil, it's been amazing to talk to you once again after all these years,
No
and
worries, buddy.
it's also been a pleasure to have you on, and I'm looking forward to part two next time.
Perfect. Hit me up, buddy. Take care. Tell your family I said hello. Okay.
Yeah,
Good to see you're doing well, buddy. I appreciate it. Take care.
of course. All right, guys, thank you very much. Episode 25. See you soon.